Thank you. Thank you. So in 2007, so that's going to be a theme here. In 2007, I did some research with a company called Chally Group. They're now owned by GrowthPlay. They do sales assessments, and I'm a big believer in their technology. If you're looking for that kind of thing, GrowthPlay. And so we basically benchmarked the practices of the best sales forces in the United States, and I'm going to share kind of some of the methodology with you. And I thought, wouldn't it be so interesting to go back to those practices 12 years later and see if the things that were standout practices 12 years ago have now become common practice, because that's what you would think would quickly happen. As soon as you identify something that's better to do, you would think people would do it. So I call this laughingly Judgment Day, but it'd be interesting to see what you think about this. So let me first set the mood. Here we go. Okay. Now the mood music. Okay. 2007. So the #1 Billboard chart was Beyonce, Irreplaceable. Believe it or not, the iPhone was launched in 2007. Doesn't it seem like we've always had the iPhone? Like only 12 years ago. And Apple dropped they dropped computing from their name to just Apple to incorporate that. Martin Scorsese won the Academy Award for Best Picture. It looks like that might yet happen again. Windows Vista launched. If you talk about something that's good in the rearview mirror, I think it's Windows Vista. Happy to see that 12 years pass. A Williams sister won Wimbledon, but Venus Williams won her 4th of 5 Wimbledon titles. She actually won 7 singles titles and 14 doubles titles with her sister. Hard to even imagine that. The Kindle was launched. The very first Kindle has a keypad. What were they thinking? What was Amazon doing? I was so young I'd yet learned to smile. And the show Mad Men was in its first season. Okay. So we got this? Everybody got 2007? You got it locked in your head? This is where it is? Okay. So let me tell you about the research. As I said, this was done with Chally Group. And if you can believe this, they interviewed 2,500 business decision makers, like on the phone interview. These weren't surveys. And they were trying to collect data on sales forces, again, to identify from the customer's perspective what were the best sales forces in the U.S. Like, I can't even imagine doing this today, but they did. Actually, I can't imagine doing it then, but they did. So they collected data on 4,500 salespeople from 15 companies. So on average, about 3 salespeople per company. And I think you had to have a minimum of 5 to win the award. They found only 4 companies that met their criteria. So they looked at things like wallet share and whether the wallet share was growing or shrinking, kind of satisfaction with the sales rep, et cetera. And then we conducted in-person interviews with these 4 companies. So we interviewed, the CEO, if we had access to them, obviously several sales leaders, HR, IT, like anyone that would talk to us, we interviewed just to try to understand what it was they were doing that was so different from the other organizations, something that the customers recognized, right? Not just something that their management was proud of, but something customers actually changed their behavior to encounter. And so I wrote the report. It was in this nice little hardback thing, and there were actual awards, right? They look cool at the time. They look a little bit like ice sculpture that might be melting a little at this point. But 12 years ago, this was like cutting edge, trophyware, right? And so before I get into the specific practices, let me just talk about some of the things that came out of this, because I find this really interesting. So here's a ranking of the industries, and there were more industries in this. This is obviously just the top 15. So what I find so fascinating about this, and it didn't make sense at first, but then it did. If you look at the top sales forces, it's like almost like commodity businesses, right? So you got paper and auto parts and office supplies and chemical and rubber and metals. And then you look down to who the customers perceive to be, the worst of the sales forces, these highly differentiated industries, right? Pharmaceuticals, we got a patent, right? At this time, Viagra was pretty easy to sell. So it's this interesting thing, because if you were going to hire salespeople or study sales forces, you'd probably gravitate toward these industries that were growing really quickly. But in reality, they were growing really quickly because they had highly differentiated products that were highly in demand. But if you're selling the same thing basically as your competitors selling, paper, ball bearings, it really puts the pressure on the sales team to add value. Kind of an interesting and maybe counterintuitive thing that came out of this. And so now I'll share with you the 4 companies that won and talk about them. So Global Imaging Systems, winner of the all-time worst logo award. Basically resold and serviced office equipment. So think copiers and things like that. Corporate Express sold office supplies, right? So they would compete with Staples and OfficeMax, but in a business-to-business way. They didn't have retail stores. Applied Industrial Technologies, which is basically an MRO. They compete with Grainger. Grainger's probably a better known in that industry. And then Insight Computing, which resold computers, basically. to business, all business to business. So this is also kind of interesting. So of the four, what seemed like best sales forces, from the customer's perspective, none of them manufactured anything. Right? They're all resellers or distributors. And at first that's kind of weird too, but then you start to think about it. They don't have to be burdened with research and development and manufacturing, right? They have logistics and operations to deal with, but basically they can invest substantially in their marketing and sales. I mean, really these people add value by having, by financing the inventory for one thing, but basically by adding value through the sales process. It was the first time ever that literally none of the winners had made anything. Just pretty much marketing and sales companies with some back-end logistics. So really interesting. And so Global Imaging Systems was later purchased by Xerox. Corporate Express was later purchased by Staples, which tells you a couple things. First of all, if you have a great sales force, you're valued in the marketplace. And secondly, it looks like Xerox and Staples use exactly the same marketing firm to design their logos. I had to keep looking at this to see if this is really what was going on. I'm on Google Images, searching. I'm like, are these really the most recent logos I can find? So if you're in marketing and looking for some logo design, I'd probably go to 99 Designs or something, because apparently the big boys can't get it right. It's differentiation there, not too much differentiation in the perception. Okay, so here are the areas of discussion. So we had maybe 30 or 35 of these practices. So obviously I don't have time to go through all of that. So what I thought I'd do is just pick some that I thought you, as kind of sales operations, IT, management community, might be the most interested in. So we'll, of course, start out with information technology. We'll talk a little bit about training and development, sales process, and then one final one on kind of organizational structure. Okay, good? Everyone good? All right, here's how this is going to go. So I'm going to start by sharing what was the common practice in 2007, cue Beyonce, and then I'm going to talk about what we found to be best practice when we interviewed these companies, what really stood out about it, and then I'm going to take a vote. I was going to have you do A, B, C, D, but I was overwhelmed. I can't take the complexity of a grading system. So we're just going to do pass and fail, right? So what I want you to do is when I share these, current practice, best practice, 12 years ago, think in your mind, has sales management, did they pass this test? Have they incorporated this? Have we evolved as a sales force past where we were 12 years ago? Okay, so it was audience involvement. Everybody? Good? Okay, all right, here we go. So IT we'll start with. And before I share this first one, I just want to, again, take you back to 2007 and explain the state of affairs, because the landscape is so different. So it's about a $10 billion industry. Gartner says that now it's about $50 billion, so substantially larger industry CRM. And these are the main players. So SAP had 25% approximately of the market, more than Salesforce has now. If you can imagine someone being more dominant than Salesforce in the CRM space, Salesforce has about 20% currently. And SAP and Oracle had about 50% of the market share. And I think about this. So S&P, they had no SaaS offering, right? Salesforce had just turned the corner from being a small business SMB product to starting to target enterprise. So these systems were big, expensive, right? And so they're basically installing CRM at such a rate because 10 years earlier they sold the company's ERP, right? And they stepped in and said, oh, well, CRM is here. Now we can do this. So here's the first common practice that we saw. And it's so, I can see it in my head because Siebel, right? So we had these massive projects to implement CRM. So we had these protracted requirements development phase. Then we had this huge programming effort with all kind of iterations and testing and whatnot. And then went to this massively disruption implementation, right? Because we're rolling out all the functionality you could possibly have in these things. And I could go on if I had more time about some disaster stories that I've seen. And what ended up happening is you had this need for functionality. Oh, it would be nice to have CRM. And then years later, in some cases, you would receive the function. This is really just hard. And what we found was when we talked to some of these companies, they totally shied away from that, not necessarily because they wanted to. So the example I'll give is applied industrial technology. So interviewing the CIO. We'll call him Jim, because his name's actually Jim. I can't get my, right, Jim. So talking to Jim, and he says, we've always wanted a CRM tool. We've talked about it many, many, many times, but none of them really fit the way we do business. And he said, so what happened is we just kind of, a salesperson would come to us and ask for something and we'd cobble it together, or a customer would come and say they want something on the website and we'd find a way to make it work. And what started out as a bunch of quick fixes actually ended up being full-blown systems. And he said, I'd be embarrassed for a CIO to come in and look at what I've got here because it's just literally tape and strings, but it works, right? Okay, first chance. So we're going to vote. So when I was putting this together, I was going to get a ballot box or something for voting, and I thought that was like just a little too heavy with the political season. So I went out and got the goofiest cartoons I could possibly find that made, so this is what we're going to do. How many people think that this, as a group, sales has passed in this area of taking huge ass implementations and making it more digestible? Pass? Fail? Wow, okay, all right, okay. So in some places I have data to support my observations. I'll tell you what I think. In this one, I didn't think I even needed it. This is fascinating. So I think that Salesforce.com is in itself proof that we've moved beyond this model. It's like, hey, you want CRM, it'll be $5 million in 18 months, or try for free. Click here, right? I mean, it may not be what you ultimately want, but you can get CRM cheap and fast. And then Salesforce developed this ecosystem where you can get the basic functionality. I mean, you could argue maybe that Salesforce doesn't even have all the basic functionality you need, reporting for one place. But this huge ecosystem, like, oh, now we need reporting. Okay, let's plug that in. Oh, now we need this. Let's plug that in. So you can basically cobble together your system. It's really been quite fascinating. So I'm going to give them a pass on this one. I think that we've moved far beyond $10 million implementations. So here's one. So let's talk about this. Imagine you're a head of sales and you're spending $10 million on CRM. There's exactly one reason you're spending $10 million on CRM in 2007. It's because you want executive reporting. And it's cynical, but it's so true. I mean, I got called by a guy who was the head of sales and marketing for a global company, manufacturer, and he said, hey, Jason, IT is launching a new CRM development process, and I'm uncomfortable. And I said, well, what are they doing? He's like, well, we're in a bunch of design sessions designing reports. They're just asking us what data they want. And I think that doesn't seem to make sense to me. So we should take this opportunity to change the way we do business. And then we talked to, in this case, Applied Industrial Technologies also. No, this is Corporate Express, actually. And they started with the customers. So if you looked at their CRM, it's actually Salesforce.com. I think at the time it was one of the largest instances of Salesforce.com. They had 8 programmers working for their company customizing Salesforce, but their time was kind of antithetical. I'm like, the value proposition of Salesforce is just turn it on, but they were so committed to making this work for them. And so, the places they started were they put forms online for the salespeople, or they put training, and they automated a bunch of research things they could do. And then for the customers, or for the customer interaction, they had an online store where the salespeople could buy marketing stuff, and they had what now would be kind of like considered sales enablement. They could go in and customize marketing and sales collateral. Like they really started with thinking through how the salespeople would interact with it, and then added reporting on top of that. How many people think that we've passed the hurdle here of starting with the salesperson in mind? So Salesforce employees raise their hands, what I saw. How many people think we're still kind of behind on this one? Yeah, I'm going to go with the guy. I'm just entertaining myself. So here's some data that's not that entertaining. So this is from a Sales Management Association report, which was recently published. I love the Sales Management Association. If you don't know them, I'd encourage you to check it out. And they surveyed companies, obviously, and 30% said that everyone was using CRM. Is anybody surprised that 70% of the organizations said that the salespeople weren't totally bought in to using CRM? Yeah, no one's surprised with that. And we've been saying we're not this for 2 decades, right? It never seems to move. But here's what gets me. So they also asked the companies what they perceive to be the predominant motivation of salespeople to use CRM. Why would salespeople use CRM? So 26% said it's valuable to the salesperson. 26% confessed that it was to comply with management expectations, and 47% said both. Let me tell you a little story about both, about the term both. So I don't have empathy. Like I don't possess it. I don't, like literally until I was in my 30s, I couldn't understand the difference between empathy and sympathy, and I'm not sure I really truly understand it even now. So I teach a course once a year in the MBA program at the University of Virginia, Darden School. And so I was explaining to the class that empathy is a very useful thing in a salesperson, right? You do the thing. And they looked at me and was like, but you said you don't have empathy. And I'm like, well, but this you can train your way around it, there's skill. You can develop the skill even if it's not innate. And so just that night I was sitting at home with my wife, and her father's been aging, right? So father's been going through some stuff. And I'd had a couple drinks, right? We were drinking wine at dinner. And I was like, what the hell? So she'd gone on, I said, that must be really hard. And she goes, for my dad or for me? And I said, for you. And she goes, and I thought, damn, I should have been doing this the whole time, man. This empathy thing is good. Right? This is like, takes so little effort. Just think of, have some wine and empathize. And so about 20 minutes later, she came walking back into the room and she goes, a few minutes ago when you said that must be really hard for you, did you mean that? Or were you just trying to seem empathetic? And I responded, I'm busted, right? I'm totally busted. But I don't want to lie. So I go, both? That's what happened here. These people got a survey and they go, why do people use Salesforce? And they go, comply with management. And then they saw there was another option, value to salesperson. Wow, I didn't think about that. Yeah, that's what we do. Both. No, not buying it. Absolutely not buying it whatsoever. So anyway, I think that this is kind of, I'm not even going to go through it. This is a fail. This is a fail. So training and development is something I used to actually care quite a bit about. As I said, I owned a sales management training company. But in 2007, there was this perception that you just train the heck out of your salespeople and get good salespeople, and then you take your good salespeople and promote them into management, and that's it. That's enough, right? And that makes intuitive sense, right? So they know how to sell. They should know what good looks like, so we'll just put them in charge of the salespeople, and they'll just kind of multiply magically all of their skills and understand. The problem is, a lot of people who are just good at stuff, they don't know why they're good at it, right? They don't have that self-reflection, not comparing themselves to others. So when we met with these companies, 201, they had developed pretty sophisticated training programs for their frontline sales managers. So in this case, Insight Computing, their head of training and development, we'll call her Julie because, Julie. And so she said they had deployed this program called the Trusted Advisor Program. They developed it for their salespeople. And obviously, they were dealing with large accounts. So they wanted a trusted advisor, right? 2007, we used that word a lot. And so they devised this entirely, and actually it was really impressive. So let me just give you it was one of the first times I'd seen kind of just-in-time training, which now is a little bit better, but she said, we don't teach them how to enter an order the first week they're here because they're not going to have orders for 6 to 9 months. So they had staged everything basically as the skill was needed. That's when they were training it. Really cool, 12 months long. And she went on and on about how hard it was. It just wasn't working. It wasn't working until they realized it was because the managers didn't know what to do with it. And so they developed from scratch this management program that was built perfectly on top of the TAP program, the Trusted Advisor program, and it took off. She said it was just amazing how hard they were struggling in the beginning, assuming their sales managers make it happen, versus really focusing on developing the sales management skill as it applies specifically to the task at hand, which was basically managing these trusted advisors. Okay, here we So this is the tooth treatment with the modern beard. So I actually went back and tried to find a 2007 beard just to see what beard, and they didn't exist in 2007 is what I discovered. No one had beards in 2007. So to find a generation when beards roamed the world freely, I had to go all the way back to the 80s. This was a previous generation of beard. This was from the television show Hotel. Does anybody remember this? You're really telling your age, right? So this was the last generation beard. Now this is our new generation beard. Okay, so how many people think we've really gotten to the point that we know how to train sales managers to do their job well? Not even one? One! I shouldn't have sold the sales management training company. It's like I got a lot of prospects sitting right here. This is a bad business decision. Yeah, so let me just talk a little bit about training, and this is an easy one to pick apart. So this is from 2009. This is from the Association of Talent Development. It used to be ASTD. They let me use this, thankfully. And so this was from 2009. So if you look at what it says here, it says that this is percentage of hours that are committed to each of these topics. So selling skills, 35%, product, industry, right, fine. Sales management, 14%. So you kind of look at this and you think, okay, well, let's say there's 1 in 10 ratio of sales managers to salespeople, and they're getting 14% of the training. This doesn't sound so bad. Sadly, I contacted ATD and asked them if I could get the updated version of this chart to see if we had kind of shifted the pie. And they sent me something. I was like, I was looking for the sales management piece. And they go, this is the same question. And I said, but it's not. They go, oh, we don't track the sales management thing anymore. I don't know. I didn't own ATD. We would have been tracking the sales management stuff. So anyway, it doesn't look that bad. This is some research that I did with Sales Management Association a few years ago. So we talked to sales trainers and we said, what do you think is important? What do you think is important the important skills to develop in your sales management team? So you can read, right? Coaching, product offerings, pipeline management, sales forecasting. You look at it at a glance and you're like, okay, I can see that, makes sense. When I look at this, what I see is that a lot of this is not management training. A lot of this is just sales training, right? Product offerings, that's just sales training. Customer knowledge, I'm surprised that's even there, but that's sales training, right? Selling methodology, sales training. Process, sales training. So what I find is that in that 14%, a lot of it really isn't sales management training. A lot of it's just managers being trained. Two different things. And then also, we took these same skills and we had firm performance, and we correlated as best we could, which training led to higher performance as an organization. And as you can see, not surprisingly, the ones that had the biggest impact look like sales management training topics, right? Business acumen, like how do you run your team like a business, assessing your salespeople's performance, managing the pipeline, forecasting, planning and analysis. The only thing that really stood out about this to me is that coaching was, though perceived at the top, it was down at the bottom, and here's my read on it. People get generic coaching programs. They don't get the TAP coaching program. They get something, and a lot of times it's career development coaching. It's not tactical coaching for how you get your salespeople doing the right things day to day. So one last thing. So then I thought, it feels like there's been a lot of interest in sales management training, and it's probably because for 10 years I owned a sales management training company. But so I looked on Amazon to see what were the top sales management training books and when were they written, right? Was this real? And so these are all the sales management books that were in the top 500,000 on Amazon's list the day I pulled this thing. And it's a little gratuitous because mine is first. However, you can, maybe a little. But the point, these are top 500,000. So, but the point is, there has been a growing interest in sales management training. I mean, I like to think, contributed to the interest through a lot of the publishing we did. So I'm gonna give this a low pass, right? There's attention being paid to it. There's an appreciation that's set by ATD that this is important, but we're just not quite there yet. We think we're doing what we're not doing is my read on this. All right, everybody still good? Okay, all right. Sales process. I love sales process. I'm a sales process guy. This is my thing. Okay, so in 2007, it was very common, even with large organizations, to find that salespeople owned the entire process, right? So salespeople would be out prospecting. This is well, maybe not pre, but before it was mainstream, like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, right? Prospecting was hard. I mean, it's hard now to get people's attention, but it's not hard to find your prospects. I mean, you can do this now. But anyway, so people are out prospecting, they're qualifying the leads, they're doing the whole thing, whatever the sales process looked like, they negotiate. And basically the salespeople owned this process from beginning to end. And what we saw when we looked at these sales forces, and maybe because they were in kind of like tech-related industries, a lot of them, the sales process was really chopped up. It's like chop, 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 chop. And so for instance, Insight Computing, this is how they did it. They had telemarketers. Remember that term? So telemarketers doing outbound prospecting, and then they went to business development managers who would actually kind of manage the opportunity, and then it went to what was it? There's one more role that they did basically start, and then they went to inside salespeople, and inside salespeople would call out and try to cross-sell and in-sell. Remember these terms like telemarketer, inside sales? How do we think we've done on this? Do you think we've leveraged the resources, specialized the resources better than we did in 2007? How many people say yes, definitely? How many people say, eh? Well, so this is a place that I think we have really done a lot. So I went into Google and I just searched, this is just the prevalence of these search terms since 2007. You can't see the beginning of this probably, but it's 2007 to last month when I ran this. Sales development reps basically didn't exist. Like maybe we call them inside sales, but I think the role is fundamentally different. Business development rep, same thing, right? Didn't exist. Customer success, barely a heartbeat. I think that we have really made huge progress in understanding that we can take this entire sales process and take it even farther, take it into marketing. We can take this entire end-to-end process and staff it with specialists. And a lot of this has been enabled because we have technology now that can pass the information along better than it used to be, right? I think this is a solid pass. I think a lot of these best practices have been born in the kind of the SaaS industry or high tech, and there are places you can't do this. Anyway, pass. I'm watching my time pass. I'm like getting a little nervous. Here's another one. So selling was basically an art best left to artists. Right, so this whole thing that sales process was bad. There was this idea that if you put sales process on salespeople, you were kind of stifling them. And I'm a process guy. So Barry Traylor, I don't know if anyone knows CSO Insights. Barry Traylor and Jim Dickey, love those guys. I was talking to Barry one time about the same time period when I met him. And I was telling him how excited I was about sales process. And he goes, oh man, you could be in our sales process club. And I said, yeah, really? He goes, yeah, you can. He said, globally, we now, including you, have 4 members. He said, and every year it's you, me, Jim, and a guy named Martin Lewis. And every year we get together and we say, this is the year. This is the year sales process is going to take off in sales. And the next year we go back and we again say, this is the year sales process is going to catch on. It's hard to even believe, but it's true. And when we talk to Global Imaging, the head of sales there, whose name was Dan, so we'll call him Dan, had developed this really detailed sales playbook. And I developed sales playbooks before, but so they basically were rolling up these office machine sales and service organizations. And so he had all these different ways, and he had this he said, we just got to the point that we couldn't hire people, we couldn't converse across the different organizations because there was no standard. And he had done this extremely detailed, like color by numbers way for different sales roles to behave. How many people think we've gotten there? Pass. How many people say, still not there? Okay, about 50-ish. All right, sales process absolutely rocks. So I contacted Miller Hyman, and they said that I could use this content, which is great. This is CSO Insights. So they have this idea, they have this nomenclature that they use for sales process. They say, I don't know if you can read this in the back, they say you either have ad hoc processes, which means basically you have no processes whatsoever. You can have informal processes, which mean you have formal processes, but people use them if they want. You have formal processes, which means, yep, we have a process and we expect everyone to use it. It's just the way we do business. And then the final is dynamic processes, which basically means you're kind of continuous improvement, right? You're using the process to improve the process. It's not just we have Miller Hyman and we expect that to happen. I'm not a statistics major. I was an econ major. I've taken some statistics courses, but this looks like it's correlated. I mean, 201, companies making plan, reps making quota, forecasted deals won. The more process you have, the better things go. This is just the reality that I think we accept a little more now. And they shared this data with me as well. I was so happy. They gave it to me like 3 days ago. I thought I was going to have to pull this. So in 2010, 40% of the companies they surveyed had formal or dynamic processes, right, toward the far end. And today it's 65%. So I think we're doing pretty well here. I will caveat this by saying that sales managers don't get the same treatment. Sales managers are the decade behind in sales management process, sales management measurement, sales management training. We still haven't quite accepted the fact that sales managers need to have discipline as well. I don't know why. But generally speaking, this was the original question we asked. Pass. So there's one practice in the organization that I really wanted to highlight. So it was commonplace back then, way back when, 2007, to basically seek help from other parts of the organization. So if you wanted to implement CRM, as I mentioned in my example with the head of sales and marketing of this company, you went to IT and you said, we want CRM, right? Can you put together an IT project for us? And if you wanted training, you went to HR, like Julie did. She went to HR, got an HR partner and said, can you help us with this? And it was, very siloed world. Sales kind of, to some extent, at the mercy of it, because it became an IT project, right? IT was running the project, sales wasn't running the project. HR was running the training, sales wasn't running the training. And what we found in these companies is they had, at the time we might call them, this is insight computing I was talking about, and her going on about how HR was such a wonderful partner in developing this the Trusted Advisor program, and then developing the sales management. She's like, HR just really committed the dedicated resources for us to do this. And that was what we found, that these companies had embedded resources, still reporting to IT or still reporting to HR. How far do you think we've come here in integrating non-sales resources into the sales force? Pass? Oh, okay. Fail? Not that many. We have knocked this one out of the park, in my estimation. Here's why. We didn't just ask for help and integrate liaison. We took over the whole damn thing, right? Used to be finance. We need someone from finance to do our incentive calculation. Never mind, we're going to hire sales operations. Going to report to sales. Sales enablement didn't exist. Oh, never mind HR, we don't need you to do our training. IT, we don't need you to do our content management. We're just going to hire someone called a sales enablement person. We're going to do that ourselves. And this is my favorite one. Chief Revenue Officer. We'll take the whole damn thing, marketing. You just come right over here. Sales is going to manage marketing. We'll do the whole thing. Like sales just got the religion that they couldn't rely on these other disciplines to do stuff the way they wanted. And they just said, forget it. Don't even send a representative over here. We're just going to hire our own. This is an absolute, in every way, high pass. Go sales. Okay. Some other thoughts. So there's some persistent worst practices that really bother me. So there are two things I'll never understand. The first is how to get the gas nozzle out of my car without spilling gas on the side of it. Like I literally am 49 years old. I can't do it. I don't understand it. The second thing I will never understand is why sales leadership thinks it's a great idea to take your salespeople and your sales managers and put them in a room for hours doing forecasting. No salesperson has ever said, if I didn't forecast, I wouldn't make my quota. Like words never spoken. Leadership is, and I know we have to have forecasts, we have to have them, they're important, but we burden the sales force so much, and most importantly for me, the obsession with forecasting takes over pipeline management. So we have these meetings called pipeline review meetings, but we're not reviewing the pipeline. We're just changing the close date, changing the dollar amount, changing the percent. These are forecasting meetings. Drives me absolutely insane. Sales managers are reactive, and I'm sympathetic to sales managers because their customers want them, their bosses want them, marketing wants them, everybody wants a sales manager. And it's just one final thing here. This sales leadership and sales generally, operations, enablement, has this aversion to simplicity. It's okay to be simple. You don't need 10 reports. If one report has the right stuff on it, go report. So I'm going to plug one thing since I don't actually have a job unless someone wants to hire me to consult with you. I wrote this book. It's full of worst practices called Sales Insanity. And it's 20 stories of the stupidest shit I ever saw as a sales consultant. And it's like lighthearted. If Cracking the Sales Management Code is like HBR, this is like People Magazine. I published it under Cannon Thomas, which would have been my daughter's name if she had been a boy. But now that I'm away from Vantage Point, I'm going to republish it under my own name. So this could become a vintage collector's item. Run out there and get it at Amazon or wherever you like. But I am seeing some smart things. So let me just talk quickly about this. I think we have started to finally focus on sales activity. This is the only thing you can control in a sales force. You can't control whether your people make quota. You can control the customers they call on, how they interact with them. I think people are finally realizing this. I think we've gotten to a point that I think people are getting smarter about incentive plans. So incentive plans, here's the truth. They should motivate the right behavior and reward the right outcomes. They shouldn't be used as management in absentia. They shouldn't be this complex thing. Well, what if they do this? We need to put in the incentive plan, so they don't do that. I think people are starting to come to their senses. I think that sales has incorporated a lot of marketing concepts like buyer personas and the segmentation that 2007 we basically only saw in marketing. I think the sales force is obviously just taken that on as well. And I think we have finally waged war on administrative tasks. Like we're using technology in a pretty smart way. Like stuff like Expensify, which just makes expense submission easy. Like that stuff is great. So my final judgment here, I think this is a work in progress. I think we've made a lot of progress since 2007. And actually, I spent 4 months earlier in the year as a head of sales for the first time in my life after consulting to sales leaders forever. This is hard stuff, right? So if you're enabling sales managers and sales leaders, this is hard. And if you are a sales leader, God bless you. This is God's work. So with that, I want to thank you for enduring me. If you'd like to get in touch with me, it's pretty easy to do. But otherwise, I thank you for your attention. I hope to see you again next year.